episode of Expansive and Unscripted. I am excited to be here with Betsaida today. And I'm going to be real with you. We just started having a conversation and began answering the question, hey, how are you? In a really authentic way. And then decided, hey, let's hit record so that other people can be part of this conversation as we're navigating just so many complexities and simultaneous truths and how we carry that in the world. So I'm so excited. Thank you for being here. Thank you for initiating this conversation and being willing to let others in on this discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And I was saying I'm also just the idea to like let's just have this conversation, but like share it with others. I also love that it is a conversation, just to hear. I'm always interested in like having my perspective expanded a little bit, and so I think it's just important to find people we can just be real with and talk. Like that how are you doing, and not just be like, oh, I'm okay. Like, no, like I am in the moment. I'm heartbroken. I am trying to just still, in my own way survive. And business as usual. It's just like so many things, and immediately my heart went out for like the people who don't have someone that they can be this transparent and honest with,
Yeah.
because it's not always that easy. It's easier to say I'm fine and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not always safe to tell people how you're really doing. And so
Absolutely.
thank you for being.
Yeah. I mean, likewise. And we both work with leadership in different ways. And part of our pre-conversation was about, how are we helping? I mean, both of us work at how do we help leaders create psychologically safer spaces? And, you're expressing compassion for the folks that have to keep showing up to the workplace when, they may have relatives who have been killed, have been martyred in Gaza. They might have relatives who are navigating situations in Sudan, Congo, and they still have to show up and go to meetings and be on Zoom camera and may not have any place where they can say, my heart is shattered and I don't know how to function today, but I still have to because I have to pay rent somehow.
Yeah. And it's so hard. And then the next level of that is that like, and then if you're a leader, which means then you are also responsible for the team, right? And it's hard to know where everybody, like how everyone feels or where they're coming from. And yeah, to hold that space, but then still like take care of yourself and then, move the business objectives forward is like, oh my gosh, I can't. Yeah, it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I feel that too as a business owner, at a point in my business where still very much like working on generating the flow of revenue and just even thinking about I saw a call for a strike for tomorrow, and I think about like I have several sessions that I literally cannot afford to not have. And so having to choose between, do I show my solidarity in this global strike, or do I like show up to the work that will help me pay my bills and keep me in business and going? And I think like I've experienced this in different like activist, justice centered spaces of there can be a lot of like peer pressure and shaming
Yeah.
within the movement of like, well, if you're not going hard, if you're not 100%, then you don't really care.
Yeah.
Um,
If you're not giving up everything, basically, like, is
yes.
the that's the bar, and it's, yeah, unsustainable.
Yeah. And um, I want to go back to things that you were talking about around nuance, because I think about like in so many movements, there are so many roles, right? And there are people, totally forgetting her name, but she's created this beautiful chart. I will link to it in the show notes, that um, just kind of expands on like, there are leader roles, there are organizer roles, there are communicator roles, there are, online social media roles, right? Like there's so many parts to what needs to be done in any movement. And when there is like one, shaming people who are doing their best to contribute in the way that they can is counterproductive. It's also ableist, right? Not everybody can show up in the streets and march. And as I think about tomorrow's strike, I think about, I may not be able to participate in all the elements of the strike, but are there ways that I can? Are there elements that I can participate in? Are there ways that I can be more mindful of, um, maybe I can skip doing that tomorrow so that I can be in solidarity. And earlier you brought up nuance, which is
Yeah.
such a huge piece of this. I would love for you to, now that we're recording, share again about how you're talking about the challenge of conveying nuance on social media.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so in my work, right, I'm a team building comedian, right? I'm all about bringing joy and humanity to work, and I work with leaders and creating like those those teams that focus on humanity and joy, right? That psychological safety. And so it's hard because I'm like, social media doesn't really afford you a lot of space for nuance. And so, I feel like when you're talking about the loss of our loss of humanity, and how the ways that we're like, just even expected to just carry on business as usual when you're literally feeling heartbroken, right? And I know that's not everybody, right? Everyone has different levels of how this things affect them. But for those of us who are really feeling like the heaviness of it, to like still have to push through like it's normal is a loss to our humanity. And so like there's that. And then there's the other piece of like, well, but also like finding joy and focusing on the things that are like going to sustain us and bring and like fill us back up. I feel sometimes that it's like, to speak about one is to completely diminish the other. And there's not space for all of that on social media. You
Mhm.
kind of show up and it's like this quick little blip of something, and you say something that's like, either shocking or flashy and um, funny, but it's like, but I feel like life is all of those things. And it can be really hard sometimes just to show up on social media. And then I can't help but like connect it back to just being in leadership, because it's similar. It's like as a leader, you feel like you only have this little thing that you can kind of say, like, and it feels so, when it feels like you don't have the full range, right? And it's
Yeah.
just, there's no nuance. You have just this little bit. The pressure then for what you say or how you show up becomes that much greater.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the thing that I feel like is hard to kind of wade through that discomfort, because none of us are just, that quick little line. None of us are just,
Yes.
the last thing that we said or did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that, like, for for me and my neurodivergent mind, context is so important for me to understand things. I'm constantly asking questions to clarify so that I can know a little bit more about the context, right? And that often gets misperceived as like challenging authority. Sometimes I am challenging authority, but sometimes I just want more information to help me do the best that I can do. Um, and so, yeah, I think about, I mean, I constantly receive comments of the like, well, what about? And I'm sure you've had your fair share of experiences, and it's like, this is a LinkedIn post. This is not a dissertation. I don't have the space to go into the
Mhm.
entire thing. And even when I do, because I will like write a LinkedIn post and then I get to the like, you have exceeded the word limit. So I'm like, well, I guess this is going to be an article because I have more to say. Um, but even then, it's like it's not possible to capture all the elements. And you know,
Yeah.
for those of us who have an awareness of the interconnectedness of all things, it's very difficult to be concise because it's like, well, but I can't mention this without also mentioning this without also mentioning this. And I would love I would love to invite readers to read with a little bit more expansiveness, right? Than like, okay, maybe this is one thing this person is saying in the context of a larger ongoing message.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And
And
oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I feel like that is such a skill that we all have to like develop and practice, because I think it's such an easy mental trap to fall into and just be like, oh, that's what they're about, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. And I was earlier, reminds me of like a post that I did that was about, George Carlin has this joke. That's one of my favorites. And he's like, do you ever notice how anyone who's driving slower than you is an idiot, but anyone who's driving faster than you is a maniac? And I just think that that's like, it's just so funny. But it's like, that's how we show up. It's like, oh, they didn't think about what I'm thinking about. Oh, they're not considering this. And like immediately we want to label people as either with us or against us. I don't think
Mhm.
how we actually are. I think that there are very few true villains. I do think there are villains. I don't want to say that. But I mean,
Mhm.
as far as like the human, all of humans on this planet, I think most of us are just so afraid of being misunderstood.
Mhm.
And we have
Yeah.
such a hard time communicating with each other. And we have such a hard time trying to understand each other outside of our own understanding.
Absolutely. And I think part of like there's so much that we can learn from um trans, non-binary, and gender expansive folks, and this has been part of my own process as I've explored my gender in that, like, once we begin to see cracks in the binary, like, of gender, we can look everywhere and begin to see, like, yeah, binary just doesn't cut it. Like, that's so two-dimensional, when in reality, humans, we are all experiencing the world multidimensionally. Um, like I was telling somebody the other day who was like, help me understand this like Venn diagram graphic that you made. I'm like, well, it's kind of challenging because in my head it's four-dimensional, kind of like a tesseract. And I don't know how to produce that in Canva. And like it's hard to I think there are some people who have more of awareness of like, yeah, I'm existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and I'm acutely aware of that. I think we all are. Not
Yes,
everybody is aware of it. And the nuance, like when that gets missing, and we forget we are incredibly complex beings,
deeply.
that can feel a multitude of things simultaneously. Like you said, we can be in heart shattering grief and also show up in joy. And, I feel like something I've learned from witnessing Palestinians in Gaza is permission to experience joy in the midst of horrors. Like, if I can see this person, saw a video of this man who was like, I walked hours to find fruit for my child and I found an orange, and he was just like radiant, glowing, the most excited I've ever seen a person about a thing. And I was like, wow. And there are these moments of kids dancing and people who are in the midst of like a genocide who are finding joy. And witnessing that is like, well, I mean, if they can show up and hold the inexplicable grief alongside joy, I certainly can.
Yeah. And we need joy.
Yeah.
Like we without joy, because to me, like, right, joy is hope.
Mhm.
Um, and when you are hope without it, right, hopeless, um, there's really no point. And
Yeah.
so to deal with, you know, the worst of the worst, and people need to have access to hope and to joy.
Mhm.
And so I think it's deeply important, and what breaks my heart consistently is how frivolous people think joy is,
Yes.
especially at work.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you said that because joy and happiness are not the same thing. Happiness is more of a fleeting like moment. Joy to
Is a
me
lens.
seems,
I
yeah,
think it's a
yes.
it's a way of being. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of, like, joy is like somebody who's curious. Like, it is
Mhm.
how you operate. You see the joy, you look for the joy. Um, it doesn't
Yes.
just happen. It's an active way of being.
Yes. An active way of being, seeking it out. Yeah, like I'm 45 and I still run outside to go look for rainbows because I don't know how many rainbows I've seen in my life, but every single time I have a somatic experience of joy when I see them. Every single time. I don't know that it will ever get old. Like, yeah, rainbow. Like, even in photos, I'm like, right? And
Yeah.
it's that deciding to seek that out.
And I want to add, though, but it's also the awareness and noticing that the very first time you saw a rainbow, it sparked joy. And you were like,
Mm,
oh, and then you continued to seek it out, right? Because I also, if people are listening and think, rainbows aren't my thing, they might not be, but there is something that is like calling to you, right, with joy. And so having that awareness to notice it and then to seek it out and to let that become part of what you do. Um, but also not promoting toxic positivity, where we
yes.
only seek joy and dismiss every other feeling that is uncomfortable, because that's psychotic. And I don't like that that's a thing. When people are like,
Yes.
oh yeah, bring joy, but nothing else. And I'm like, you can't do that.
Mhm.
You either feel what you feel or you feel nothing. There is no, like, you can't only fine tune things and think you can only turn up joy, but turn down everything else. Um,
Yes.
no, that's not
Yes.
how this works.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think that's such a vital piece of this conversation. That joy is not about ignoring or tuning out what is hard. And I have this this space that I hold with some folks monthly. It's a grief, art, rage circle where we just have space to be uncensored and grieve and rage about whatever we need to. And we've spoken collectively in that space about how just even in the span of one of those gatherings, we move through grief and rage, naming the things that are the cause of the grief and rage. And we are also able to show up in silliness and playfulness and joy, even in the same setting, even within this, like, this is a grief rage circle. And I think I've come to the conclusion that, at least for myself, I cannot show up to the joy and the silly and the playful if I don't have space to acknowledge the heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when I'm interacting with people who are not interested in or not able to um, connect with the heaviness that's going on in the world, I I can't access like my whole authentic self, which includes like the silly playfulness, just being my weird old self. And so it's interesting to notice that it's like when we make space for the grief and the rage, that's also like inviting in the other piece. Like you said, like you can't pick and choose which feelings you experience. It's saying like we're acknowledging this, and all the human experience feelings are welcome.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think it's so uncomfortable because people don't really like feelings. And I find that a lot in the work
It's
that I do.
accurate.
So
That's
much
accurate.
so much of the work that I'm doing is really helping people like recognize like, hey, these are okay. Um, and so it is and it's something that people have to like practice. And I also think as a leader, it really starts with you. Like you have to be comfortable with your expression of feelings and just understanding them before you try to hold space, I think, for others in a real way. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think what I see happening is where people are like, well, I'm going to try to hold everything in and mask everything, but then I'm
Yes.
going to hold space for others. And then like it ends up kind of crushing you and getting like
Mhm.
building resentment and rage. And it's because it has to start with you. Um,
Yes.
I also don't think that you are responsible for everyone the way that a lot of leaders think that they are. Um,
Mhm.
there's, just we can, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about the levels of accountability that are required,
Yeah.
personal, yeah, and team and company accountability that need to be brought forward. Um,
Mhm.
but just like for people to start with themselves, like just noticing. You don't have to do anything about it, but just kind of give yourself permission to notice and not, and like they're all valid. All feelings are valid. If there's one thing I can
Mhm.
say is that like they don't they don't mean you have to do something with them, but you should just listen to them, right? They're
Mhm.
they're data, not directives.
Ooh, I love that so much. Feelings are data, not directives. Yes, you're speaking to my like retired therapist heart. Um, that I mean, I feel like I'm always this broken record of like, can we please lead with curiosity? Um, because like you said, like just that practice will carry us so much deeper into co-creating safer spaces
Yeah.
with one another. Um, and I love, in the work that you do, you access a lot of those things through play, which is so powerful. And when I was working as a complex systems trauma therapist, I would often talk with, I mean, with all my clients, we would get to a part of the process where like, well, and now is where you learn how to play again. Because, maybe that was stolen from them in childhood, or maybe they had that in childhood, but it was stolen from them um, because of toxic relationships or toxic workplace. And play is such a vital piece of reconnecting with ourselves and healing. Healing is not complete without the play piece, without the curiosity, without creativity.
Mhm.
And that can look so many different ways, right? Like
Yeah.
you use comedy and improv, which I think is just brilliant.
Yeah, and just helping people play. I think, adults generally, like you said, we stop playing. We see it as like this frivolous, childish activity, and we are so focused on performing adultness that we lose play. And I would say, you know, again, play to me, playfulness is an approach. So
Mm,
it's not like the activity that you're doing, because sometimes what we call play as adults is just performance, right? So if
mm,
I'm going to go and I'm going to play like a sport, I'm not really playing, I'm performing. I'm performing
mm,
this sport, um,
mhm,
even recreationally, right? But play is when you're showing up and you're like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm in a space of curious exploration, um, and I'm trying things that I haven't done before. That is
mhm.
play. And so that can
Yes.
look different for in different ways. Like, for some people, play could be an exploratory hike.
Mhm,
That's play. You're out and you're searching, you're in, paying attention to things you haven't before. For some people, play could be, Lego bricks and building something, right? Play could be, um, play could be reading for some people
mhm,
and like just learning more and like planning things. Like there's so many different ways that people can play that I don't think people are realizing um, how much it's missing in their life, or they think it
mhm,
has to look a certain way. And it's really just, how are you stepping into the unknown with a joyful
mhm.
curiosity?
Yeah.
Those are play moments.
Yes. And like you said earlier, play is essential for the larger work. And I think, I'm thinking about ways that I was raised that like you get your work done first and then you play, having to earn play,
Ooh,
right? That's very like puritanical, religious, capitalist, all the things mixed together. And so I think about that element too of like part of showing up for ourselves is giving ourselves permission to play and know that we are worthy of it, and it is not something that has to be earned first.
yeah,
um because I think about conversations that I have with people who are like, I work 3 jobs, like when the hell am I going to play? And
right.
sometimes, like you said, like it can squeeze into the cracks and crevices of our lives. Sometimes it's like playing radio roulette. Like, I don't know what station I'm going to listen to. Like, let's just let the seek go until it goes. Or maybe people don't listen to the radio anymore. Maybe it's just we play Spotify roulette or whatever. Right? Like, there can be ways to incorporate that, like, into your commute to work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I 100%, because it's really about like how you show up and how you do things, right? So like play is a state of it's a state of being, it's a state of mind. And so exactly to your point, I tell people sometimes like just take a thing that you've done before and do it different intentionally, just to be like, oh, like typically, like, I'm right-handed and I drink with my right hand, but sometimes I'll just like make myself a cup of coffee and just using my left hand just to see how that feels. And it's kind of like throws me off just a little bit, but that's play.
Yes.
And it's just,
Yes.
again, what play is also doing, it is keeping me from becoming an arrogant person, because
Mm.
you cannot be arrogant in play, which is why I'm saying that
Yes.
like a lot of these performance sports are not play,
Yeah.
right? Because you're showing up like, this is me, I am the best. But in play, you're like, I am figuring it out. And so
Yes.
helping you stay like, right, that kind of intellectual humility, which also I think is important for, we were talking earlier about being able to connect with each other and understand different perspectives. Somebody who knows how to play is going to get there so much faster because they're
Mhm.
constantly expansive in the way that they understand the world and others.
Yes. And showing up, giving themselves permission to make mistakes, right? If there's
Huge.
no agenda, there's no
Yeah.
KPIs of play, then like it's okay if you pile the blocks high and they fall over, and it's like, cool, I learned something about gravity and physics right there. Right? Like if we look at the model of children, their play is learning about the world.
Yeah.
And like unhindered children have no qualms with making mistakes. It's like, okay, I'll just try something else. And I think that's so challenging. Like we all have baggage in our lives from experiences that we have had when we have made mistakes. Sometimes it is traumatic, sometimes
Yeah.
it is humiliating, sometimes it is, I just a million different things, right? So I understand that there's baggage with this idea of like giving ourselves permission to make mistakes. And it's also part of, like you said, when we can do that for ourselves and give ourselves the expansiveness of like grace and like, okay, let's try a different way.
Right.
It is much easier to give that to others.
Yes. And it's easier for ourselves to continue to show up for ourselves.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes.
one of the things that I say often, and uh, is like, I don't even like, when I think about mistakes, I just define mistakes as something that I didn't expect to happen just happened,
Hmm.
right? But then that's also the definition of a surprise.
Mm.
Like the only difference between a mistake and a surprise is my perception of it. And I
Mm.
prefer surprises as a term than mistakes, because a mistake makes me feel like, oh no, I've messed up. I closed down. I'm like, I'm not going to keep showing up for myself, for
Mhm.
others. Oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I wasn't supposed to talk about it like that, or I wasn't supposed to do this, or whatever that is. But a surprise, oh, right?
Mhm.
Okay, the blocks fell. Well, now I know something, and now I can keep
Mhm.
playing. I can keep showing up. It's
Yes.
a different energy that we can bring, and so I really try to encourage folks to think about the surprises and notice the surprises in your life. Even just noticing the surprises, you're training those play muscles.
Yes. I love thinking about that in that way. I've often I often think about it in like science lab terms, like I'm just doing an experiment and it might blow up, but cool, I have like protective gear to keep me safe. And I I will learn something from that. I'm choosing to learn something from that little like, okay, well, those were the wrong levels. Let me go back to the drawing board and recalibrate and see if it will work this time. I talk like that with my clients. Like, I'm never going to be offended if somebody comes back and be like, that idea that you gave me was total disaster. Cool, let's try something else. Like, it's just an experimentation until we find what fits. And then that's also part of what where we find innovation too, right? If we're
Yeah,
letting ourselves be curious and wander around in our minds and try things, that's where innovation and creation happen, which I think the part of our society that has become so suppressive of anything different, um, it like it's suffocating curiosity
Yeah.
and innovation and growth. And there's another thing that my brain was thinking, but it left. Maybe it'll come back.
No, but you're absolutely right. And I also like I find it so unfortunate, I guess I would say, is that you know, companies value creativity and innovation, but they're not creating spaces always for people to be their most creative or innovative. And so I think that, that is such an important piece of like people have to have that space to try, to
Mm,
experiment, right? To play, to be surprised. Um, and I think, yes, we have to create these spaces, but then also people individually have to feel that they are brave enough to try because we all come with different experiences, like you're saying,
mhm.
and what works for one person isn't going to work for every person. And so again,
Yeah.
but like all of that nuance and context takes time. And it
Mm,
also always just feels like we don't have the time. And that's the
mm,
part that I'm like, the false urgency that there's no time to
yes.
actually make this work for people. Um, nah, I don't buy that.
Yes. Yes. And I'm thinking back to what you said at the very beginning of this conversation about like, I'm glad that we are having a conversation because in my experience, I've witnessed so much value in the conversation, whether or not we answer the question, whatever the question is. There's value in sitting with the question and exploring it. And I think about in workplace settings, where you hear stories of leaders who are like, I don't want to hear you complain. Like, bring me solutions. If you can't bring me solutions, I'm not. And I think, well, you're missing an opportunity for a conversation to explore solutions.
Correct.
Like, and I'm thinking as we're talking, I'm like, oh, well, like a brainstorming session feels like play to me, right? That's like, let's just toss out ideas. And it is surprising to me how many people are unwilling to engage in brainstorming for whatever reason. Like, I don't want to make judgments, but it's like, no, just say whatever comes to your mind. Some of it's going to be, you know, irrelevant. Some of it's going to be amazing. Let's just throw all the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. But I think that requires an amount of like inhibition that is not often invited or welcome in many spaces.
Yeah.
Like, people want to just arrive at the solution without the whole process of like exploration, curiosity, experimentation, and mental play around what are all the ways that we can look at this problem?
Yeah. Well, and I think that is absolutely true. I would say yes. And there are also a lot of times where the brainstorm is pointless because there was never an intention to do anything with those ideas.
Mm,
And I have seen that, right? Where either leadership comes in, they already have an idea of what they want to do, but they're just kind of like, tossing a creative bone to the team, which
yes,
is honestly offensive. Um,
yes.
or they just are kind of like letting people talk, but then they don't want to do any of those things, or they don't really like they never had an intention to do anything with it, or they forget, or for whatever reason. Um, because that's also teaching everyone who gave their ideas that this was a waste of your energy and time.
Mm,
And so, if every time I contribute something and it is ignored, it is diminished, it is you know, dismissed. I mean, how many times do you think I'm going to keep giving these ideas?
yes,
And so I
yes.
think it's, there's a lot of things and sometimes all of that's happening at the same time. So I understand why people don't want to brainstorm sometimes. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Like they've been shut down. So yeah, why
yeah,
am I going to give you my ideas?
right.
You don't care anyway. Something you did that I know as a part of improv, you said yes,
Yeah.
and that's something that I have been practicing, like in my language. I am working on eradicating but from many of my sentences, and in order to replace it with and also, um, and I just want to throw that out there because I think that just that practice can be such a great start to inviting nuance into the conversation of um, whether it's your own personal, interpersonal dynamics, whether it's workplace conversations. That's how this whole conversation started. Hey, how are you doing? I'm here, and also devastated and angry and confused. And I think it's beautiful. So thank you for
Yeah.
yes anding.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing that people can do. Like, it's helping you think of, like, that is really one of the improv mantras, is like, how do you take what's already here, what's being said, what's being done, and then find a way to add to it, not diminish it or take away or be in conflict or opposition. Uh, because when you're thinking that way, it's not only is it like supportive and collaborative, we just build faster. If every time, going back to the blocks metaphor, if every time, you put up two blocks, I have to knock down one so that I can put up a block, we're going to be building forever. But if every time, you're like, yes, and then I add my blocks, like, we'll have a beautiful tower soon.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I hate that we're like at the end of our hour and we have to stop. So obviously that means we need to like have other parts of this conversation in other episodes of the show. I mean, that's just
That went
how
so
that works
fast.
in my mind.
Yeah.
I know, so fast. Thank you so much for yeah, just being willing to show up in this vulnerable way and have a conversation where we invite other people to listen in. Before we do wrap up, I just want to give you a moment to share. You have some fun things that are going on, something called the Leadership Playground, I believe. I would love for you to share with folks a little bit about that. So, and I will put links to all the things you talk about in the notes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the Leadership Playground, as I said, I work with leaders really, and it's a weekly space where you can come and you can play. It is improv games based. I lead everything, guide you through it, but it's really with the intention of flexing those leadership muscles. Playful leadership is what I call it, and so it's really about helping you like tap into your creativity. Like, how do you bring that leadership charisma forward, right? Strengthening your compassion and listening and all of those. There's so many skills that we can learn from knowing how to improvise and doing it together. And what does that mean for you as a leader? I would love to invite any leader to come play, come grow, come stretch, come laugh and learn.
Yes, I love that so much. Oh my goodness, thank you. And just this conversation and you have been so nourishing to my joy. Thank you for
Oh,
that. And I can't wait for next time. All right, folks, stay tuned for